from the Yinova Center. Before we dive into our discussion on endometriosis, for those of you who are new to either Jessica Murnane, Jill Blakeway, or Yinova, I wanted to let you know a little bit about our center, as well as tell you a bit more about our speakers. Yinova is an integrative wellness center acclaimed for its expertise in reproductive health. With 3 clinics in New York City and virtual services for people around the world, we work in partnership with our patients to realize their full potential. We offer acupuncture, Chinese medicine, bodywork, and virtual consultations from the field's leading practitioners. Jessica Murnane is an author, speaker, and creative consultant. She's written 2 books, The Cookbook, One Part Plant, A Simple Guide to Eating Real, One Meal at a Time, and Know Your Endo, an empowering guide to health and hope with endometriosis, which was actually just recently published in late April. She's a sought-after speaker and host that's spoken at Apple, South by Southwest, Wanderlust, and Charleston Wine and Food, among others. Jessica has contributed to and appeared in several magazines and websites, including Bon Appetit, Goop, Shape Magazine, The Kitchen, Mind Body Green, and The Coveteur. And then we have Dr. Jill Blakeway, who is an acupuncturist, herbalist, and the founder of the Yinova Center, where she's been treating patients for over 2 decades. Jill's always been passionate about supporting her patients' reproductive health. She credits much of her success to combining the ancient wisdom of Chinese medicine with modern conventional biomedicine. She has written 3 books on health and healing, Making Babies, Sex Again, and Energy Medicine. Many of you sent in questions prior to this event, which we're really looking forward to diving into. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to submit them or pop them in the chat box or Q&A, and I can read them out loud for you. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Jessica and Jill to get started.
Thank you, Emma. Jessica, I'm so happy that you're here. And what I want you to know is I have a copy of your book, Know Your Endo, and I read it and I love it. I love it. I love how helpful it is. It's going to help so many people. So my first question for you is actually why you wrote this book. What prompted you to write this book about endo?
I wrote it for everyone that has endo. I mean, it makes me emotional to say, but everyone that has endo, anyone that has felt alone in their endo, anyone that's looking for answers, because I think with endometriosis, I know that there's a lot of people here with it. It can feel very lonely sometimes. And even with the most supportive team, it can still feel lonely if you're not connecting with someone else that has it. So I just wanted it to be kind of a love letter guide to everyone with endo.
I'm so glad you did. And it is very you. It has lovely recipes in. I want people to know that it has lovely recipes as well as a sort of very common sense guide to how to navigate your endo. And actually that brings me to my first question to you. And then Emma, I think, has so many questions from people at home and I want us to get to them. But there isn't a sort of one size fits all in some ways, is there? Endometriosis affects people differently. And therefore the solutions need to be a little bit trial and error too. You have to work out what works for you. And I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because even the stages of endo, someone can have stage 1 and maybe be in more pain than someone that has stage 4. So I think that sometimes, sadly, we get into this comparison game no one's comparing themselves to us. We're doing it to other people. Like, well, maybe they have this, so I should feel better. With endo, I don't think we can compare because I think depending on where endo is located, what your lifestyle is like, who's in your life, what your stressors are, it can feel very different. And I also think, there's huge misconceptions. Not everybody with endo has painful periods. Mm-hmm. Some people, it's fatigue that they experience most. Some people, it's painful periods. So it impacts everyone so differently. But I think that what we can do is create a baseline of management tools that we can apply no matter how good or bad we're feeling.
I was recently talking to an endometriosis surgeon. We're doing some clinical research into endometriosis. I think we may have told you at Yinova. And what we're doing is we're looking at if after surgery we can slow regrowth down, because that's a big problem. But one of the things she said to me just caught my attention. And she said, I've been operating on endo for a long time and I'm seeing more painful endo. And like you, she was just saying there's no rhyme or reason. Some people have stage 4 endo and no pain. Some people have the teeniest bit and it just happens to be in the wrong place and it's causing them a lot of pain. But she said she thought the painful element of it was getting worse. And we talked about it. And one of the things that we both agreed is that our lifestyles are more inflammatory. During the course of our careers, people are exposed to more toxins, more processed food, and in general have more inflammatory lifestyles. And we felt like that might be the source of the pain and therefore the way out. So
Well,
I'm interested
stress.
in this in your book.
I mean, look at how much more stress we have too. I mean, just opening up Instagram can be stressful too, you know? So I think there are, whether it's toxins or food, I think we can also look at the stress, because I think stress can be hugely inflammatory to us. And also, you know, as you read in the book, increased stress can increase pain. So I think finding, you know, I don't think that meditating twice a day is going to make your endo go away, but I do think it can help us at least maybe calm our bodies more.
Yes, and decrease that sort of inflammatory load and help you sort of control symptoms. I agree. Emma, I bet you have lots of questions, so I'm going to pass this to you.
Have lots of questions that cover kind of a wide range, so I'm definitely going to try and get to as many as possible. But I thought a good one to start with, because I know that it's not always to be diagnosed with endometriosis. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but what are some signs of endometriosis, and is there a way to self-diagnose, or what would your advice be for someone who suspects they have endometriosis?
Well, Jessica covers this beautifully in her book, so I'm going to pass this to her.
Well, you know, I think what's so important is just, you know, talking about the symptoms briefly. We have painful periods, which we mentioned, which again, okay, I'm not going to say you may or may not have this. Let's just make that the disclaimer. You may or may not have all of these, but painful periods, painful sex, fatigue, GI issues are huge with people with endo. Over 90% of people with endo have reported GI issues. Urination issues, meaning frequency, retention, urgency. I mean, infertility is another huge thing that people are reporting with endo. So unfortunately, you're not able to self-diagnose and have an official diagnosis. Although I do think that many of us in our guts and our hearts and our souls, I think usually we know that there's something wrong. So I have people in my life that have never been diagnosed with endo, yet know that they think that they have it. I think that although we can self-diagnose, I do think it is important if you're able to get a diagnosis, because depending on where lesions are at in your body, that can create more issues in our life. And I think it's good if we can to have those answers. Would you agree?
Yes, and the gold standard of diagnosis is a laparoscopy, and really that's the official diagnosis. So you know, often it's possible to see endo on sonogram, but often it isn't. So that is the sort of official way of diagnosing, which unfortunately is a procedure. But then we know 100% whether you have it or not. And as you mentioned, a lot of the symptoms could be other things, and that is the issue. But dyspareunia, painful sex, is one of those things that always pokes up my ears. And obviously you can have painful sex for lots of reasons, but if it's a very deep, crampy, throbbing pain, rather than kind of local irritation, I start to want my patient to have endo ruled out. And you're so right about urinary tract issues. Particularly, I think it sometimes gets misdiagnosed as interstitial cystitis, which is the kind of cystitis where you don't really have bacteria in your urine all that often, but you have the sort of frequency and urgency. And I think a lot of endo gets missed because people think they have some kind of urinary tract thing.
Well, and a lot of people with endo do have IC.
Yes,
so
they do.
With endo, there's so many comorbidities where you can have endo and you have a much higher risk of having a lot of these other issues. So that's another reason why I think it's important to identify if it's endo or not, because we can't also blame everything on endo. If there's other things that are happening, we need to be able to treat everything that's going on.
There's also very high incidence of autoimmune diseases with endo, as well as irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel issues. And I think, my patients always ask me what causes what's the root cause?
Yeah.
And as you know, we don't completely know. There is undoubtedly a genetic component, in so much as often people's mothers have had endo, and you write about that in your book. But I do think that probably one of the causes is a dysfunction of the immune system. Like a functional immune system working optimally can clear up cells in the wrong place. That's kind of its job. And so whether it's genetic, some people say it's about retrograde menstruation. As you know, there are theories that it happens in utero when you're an embryo with misplaced embryological tissue. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows the answer completely. No. But I think some kind of immune function issue is part of it. And I think that's why we see it going hand in hand with so many autoimmune diseases, which we do, don't we, Jessica? We see people have
and I mean,
Hashimoto's and things.
I've been on so many podcasts with more functional doctors that say, well, endo is an autoimmune condition. It's like, well, it's not actually. Yeah. It might act autoimmune at times, but it's not an autoimmune condition. And I think that's the tricky thing is, even though it's not, we can also maybe treat it in a way that it is, with the lower inflammatory foods, with movement, with stress management, because it does respond to these things the same way that some autoimmune conditions do. But, thankfully, the research that you're doing, we can't figure out how to stop its growth yet. So I think that is one of the reasons why we can rule out the autoimmune, is because we don't understand the source of it yet.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to the outcome of our research, because anecdotally, which is not good enough, we are slowing down as acupuncturists. And if I had to hazard a guess at slowing down regrowth, I would say, Jessica, that's because we work in that area of prompting the body to self-heal. Patients always ask me, what's qi? And qi is really your body's intelligence. It's all the bits of your body that are conscious and make decisions outside of your mind, which is a lot. Your body's constantly calibrating. And we are, Chinese medicine is particularly good at prompting the body to self-heal. And so I think we can, we can't make endo dramatically disappear, but we can slow down that inflammatory reaction. And I think we can slow down regrowth by prompting the body to deal. And so obviously, like a lot of complex chronic issues, it requires a team, including, a specialist endo doctor. But I do think we have a role there. Emma, what else would people like to know?
So while we're talking about, I know you started talking about some management tools, so I definitely want to touch on that as well. But before we move on from symptoms, someone submitted a really interesting question, so I'm just going to read it out. When other people describe having symptoms that could relate to endometriosis, do we have a responsibility to inform them about it? And if so, what would be a responsible way of doing this?
You mean as practitioners or just as people?
I think as people.
This question made me cry because I think that so much of this we feel really shameful about when we talk about our periods, that, sorry, I get emotional about this part, because I think if someone were to say to you, wow, I'm having these painful periods, I have fatigue, and if you could say, okay, I'm not a doctor, I'm not really sure, but could you maybe check out this website or maybe check out this book? Because I'm telling you, I have had experiences. This just happened recently at the post office. I was mailing my book to some people, and the woman at the post office said, what is this book? And I showed her, and I'm telling you, she was stopped dead in her tracks and just wasn't even moving. She was reading the back. She was like, this is me. And it's like, she had never even heard the word endometriosis before. So I think even if we just share the word with people, and, I think when we are feeling sick, the last thing that we want is someone to say, you should do this, you should do that. So I think a very responsible and thoughtful thing to do is, hey, have you heard of this word before? And send them my website, Know Your Endo, send them to Yinova. I know you have articles about endo too, but yeah, just saying the word out loud is so huge.
Yeah, I would mention it to people, just like you might want to check this out because it's very underdiagnosed, actually. We pick it up because we do a lot of fertility work at Yinova, and it can cause fertility struggles. And so we often pick it up and refer people to a doctor, to have a proper diagnosis and have it ruled out or ruled in. But a lot of people are struggling with painful sex, painful bowel movements, sort of IBS kind of symptoms, urinary tract symptoms, heavy, painful periods, and just think that's their lot in life. Like, this is how it is. And particularly if their mum had it too, which happens, this is how it just is. So I do think that if you spot that pattern, it's worth saying, have you checked out endometriosis and, seen if there's some solution there?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think people always ask me, how can I advocate better? You don't have to have an Instagram account or a Yinova center. I mean, you can talk to your neighbor or your friend about this. Like, that could change somebody's life.
Yeah, like the lady in the post office.
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
I love that story. That's so moving and so powerful. Because I don't know if this statistic is still correct now. Maybe the time frame has changed, but I've read that it can take someone up to 10 years to be diagnosed with endometriosis, because often they'll go to their doctor and say, my periods are painful, and they'll say, yeah.
Exactly.
Fully listen. So I think that I love that idea of just saying the word more so that people are more familiar with it, and kind of empower themselves by learning more about it and seeing if that's what's happening.
And if you can't pronounce it, you can just say endo.
And
that works too.
Yeah, definitely. So someone just sent it into the Q&A. So they said, do you have any suggestions for someone diagnosed with endo, lapped 5 years ago, and is planning to come off birth control after 15 and attempt a fertility journey?
This would be Jill.
Yes, I do. Yes. First, you don't feel doom and gloom. There are lots of people with endometriosis get pregnant. It's possible to solve this in all sorts of ways, big and small, and we live in a time with many solutions. So all will be well. I'm going to start there because I think it's scary. You've been kind of suppressing your endo on the birth control pill, which is one way of handling it. And as you come off, you're no longer suppressing it. It hasn't gone away. That isn't how that works. And so the first thing we would do is see what your symptoms are. And we would start at Yinova by regulating your menstrual cycle, which we do with everybody coming off the birth control pill anyway. And we'd be looking out for symptoms. We'd probably send you fairly early to a reproductive endocrinologist rather than later, because we'd be concerned about regrowth when you come off the pill. So we'd want you to get pregnant in a nice sort of timely fashion before that happens. And we'd be giving you advice to keep it at bay. And one of the things that we would be doing is making sure that you're not too estrogen dominant in relation to progesterone, which happens a lot. And what makes people estrogen dominant in relation to progesterone? Toxicity in household cleaners for a start. So we'd help you do a big cupboard clean out. I can't even begin to tell you, Jessica, how many times I'm working on Zoom at the moment. I literally go with my patient on Zoom and look at their cupboards, and we weave things out together. It's actually really fun. I do this with people all over the world, which is kind of fun. If you enjoy people, it's sort of it's a fun thing to do. What else causes estrogen dominance? Constipation. Because your stool excretes excess estrogen. So we would be making sure that you had a bowel movement every day, because if your stool sits there for any length of time, not only does it get dry as your body takes the water back out of it, but you get more estrogen in your blood. So we would want to make sure that that isn't an issue. Your liver is supposed to uptake excess estrogen. And so we'd make sure you didn't have a sludgy liver. We would probably ask you not to drink alcohol. It doesn't help with inflammation anyway, but it also that frees up your liver to do its task of taking up excess estrogen. And then we'd put you on an anti-inflammatory diet, and we'd give you herbs that depending on your type of endo, treat the actual endo. And by depending on your type, what I mean is there's both pigmented and non-pigmented endo. And the pigmented bleeds and the non-pigmented doesn't. And the non-pigmented is more mucousy. Now, interestingly, the bleeding endo, which causes way more trouble and way more pain, is less implicated in infertility than the non-bleeding endo, which is interesting. And it's because it's associated with mucus, and that mucus gums things up. Not the technical term, but you know what I mean. It starts to gum up fallopian tubes. It starts to gum up the ovaries and things like that. So we would be giving you anti-mucus herbs and promoting fluid metabolism. If you had the bleeding endo, we'd be making sure that we gave you blood circulatory herbs. Even though you're bleeding in places where it can't release. And so we would be making sure that your body was capable of taking the debris away. And we'd also use acupuncture in an anti-inflammatory way, as well as a sort of circulatory way. And these are very common ways of using acupuncture. You can use thermal imaging to show that acupuncture reduces inflammation. You can use Doppler ultrasound to show that it increases circulation. And we would be packing you off to your doctor to make sure that there isn't any structural issue with the endo. And you know, sometimes it's blocking an ovary, and that means your chance of conceiving is only when you ovulate on the other side. And sometimes it's not really in the way as such. And so we'd want to know that so that we knew what we were dealing with. But that is how we'd start when you came off the pill. But we'd also reassure you that there are solutions. And if most people with endo get pregnant sort of relatively easily with some help. If necessary, doing IVF, they often give Lupron, which shuts your system down for quite an extended period of time before the IVF to kind of subdue the endometriosis, and then they do IVF. And I've seen that work very well, actually. I have patients who have beautiful babies because of that, which is good to know. What say you, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that just blew my mind. That's not something I would. I'm more of the researcher, lifestyle tips. I did not know that. So that's, I mean, my mom had extremely heavy periods. She had extreme pain all the time, and she had 4 kids.
Yes.
Just boom, boom. Like, she actually had her 4th child at 40. So I definitely, the stat is that 50% of unexplained infertility is endo. So there's a lot of people that aren't diagnosed with endo until they're going through infertility. And for some, I think that it is sometimes a little bit too late. But for others, if we're able to catch it in time and be able to work with someone like you, I do think that there's hope.
I think there's much hope, and more as time's gone on. Sometimes from people like us, but also from the Western medical field, particularly the reproductive endocrinologists, the fertility doctors, have done a lot of work in this area, and they're very skilled at taking people through. So although 50% of unexplained infertility could be attributed to endo, which is quite the statistic, endo doesn't necessarily cause fertility in all people, just like Jessica's mum. So I always start with that with patients, because I think you read a lot of stuff that sort of doom and glooms you, and that makes you feel defeated before you even start. The truth is, you may have no problem at all, and that would be great. Just like Jessica's mum, she had really painful periods, but 4 kids, including one at 40, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah.
That was really comprehensive and interesting.
Sorry, it's my specialized subject.
No, that was interesting. I wanted to shift slightly to the emotional aspect and get your insight on this. So someone sent in, what is your advice on handling the emotional aspect of endometriosis? The pain and fatigue for me weighs so heavily that it affects my mood completely. And they were wondering what your advice would be for that.
Well, Jessica writes about this beautifully in her book, so I'm going to have her start.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to mention that you're not alone in this, that, they did that study, the BBC did a study where they interviewed over 13,500 people with endo, and nearly half said that they had suicidal thoughts at one point. So it is not your fault that this is happening to you. I think that sometimes we blame ourselves so much. I mean, I went through a very dark time and then even shamed myself for having a dark time because I'm like, I have all this support. I have great friends and family. Like, I shouldn't be sad. But when you have a chronic illness, I mean, that happens sometimes. So I think for me, my biggest tools are talking about it and not feeling shameful about it. I think movement is a huge tool for me. And I'm not talking about going and running a marathon and flipping tires. I mean, it is going on a foam roller, it is jumping on my little trampoline, it's whatever I can do in the moment. And then I also think stress management tools for me, again, it's not just meditation. Like, I love doing jigsaw puzzles. And I also have a therapist. If you can afford a therapist, I think that's a huge, someone that you are actually paying to listen to you, because I think a lot of times with endo, we can feel like a burden sometimes, and we don't want to continue to complain to our family and friends. So I think having someone as a team member, a therapist, can also be extremely helpful. And then last, I think I call them friendos. Having friends with endo is huge. And that doesn't mean that you have to talk about endo together. That can be recommending shows to each other while you're in bed, or, you know, it can be silly things, because I think to have someone in your life that gets it can feel so powerful.
I think that's such good advice. And I love that you talk about shows, because I always think when I talk to patients about stress management can become very sort of sanctimonious. But the truth is that watching your favorite funny show is stress management. You don't just have to, you know, so, I mean, if you like to meditate, this is great, but you don't just have to sit in the lotus position doing this. You can actually just take some time off and laugh. Laughter in Chinese medicine releases stagnation, and endo at its root has blood stagnation. It's circulatory in some ways. So I always try and help people come up with a plan, which is why I love your book, because it is a plan that they can actually do, you know, that isn't just defeating. So not a plan that is so complex that you can never eat out or have fun, or do you know what I mean? A sort of 80% is perfection kind of plan. But I do think some movement every day is not just important for mood, it's very important for the endo. So many of my patients tell me that if they get some exercise, it doesn't, I'm so glad you stressed that you don't have to train for a marathon, you know, just if you walk around the block with the dog, but if you get some exercise every day, it seems to help the symptoms a lot, particularly pain. And that makes sense to me, because the pain is oh, Gabriella is just saying sometimes laughing can bring up a flare, so it's painful to laugh. Thank you, Gabriella. That is true. In which case, we'll have you distract yourself with jigsaw puzzles, which was also a good idea. But the reason that exercise helps with the pain is because it helps your liver, which we talked about. Your liver needs to work well. And people always think about blood circulation as being helpful for the heart. But of course, good blood circulation goes through all your organs, including your liver. And it helps with circulation in the pelvis. So some kind of exercise, some kind of food regimen, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that is actually doable. And I loved your lovely recipes in that book, in this book, for this reason. And Jessica also gives advice on how to have your diet without it affecting your family. Tell people that, because that's a great tip. Because that's what makes it hard for people.
Well, I mean, I get so many messages from people that say, I want to make changes to my diet, but A, my family's not supportive, or B, I don't want to cook 5 meals. One, I think you need to have a sit down with your family, if they're open to it, and say, I'm not doing this to be cool or weird or different. I'm doing this to be a better person for myself and for you. The better I feel, the more I'm going to be able to be with my family. And I think if you can kind of get your family to understand that on that level, I think that is a huge first step. And then I think I always say BYOD, bring your own dessert. Wherever I go, I bring my own dessert. I bring my own meal that everyone can share, because, you know, I think that sometimes when we make changes to our lifestyle, specifically diet, I think people can take it personal. They think that they're changing, I'm not. Or maybe, what does this mean, their change? Are we not going to have our pizza nights together anymore? So they almost take it personal. So I think if we can kind of include people into the change, so maybe you make an amazing gluten-free vegan pizza that you can eat together, and maybe you don't even announce that it's vegan and gluten-free. Maybe it's just delicious. I think if we can pull them in, I think that that is a good first step, and have them understand why you're doing it. It's to feel good. That's not selfish.
Jessica also suggests toppings, like you have
Toppings,
a base meal, and then if they want cheese and things like that, they have it as toppings. I thought that was very practical. I like your book because it's so practical,
Thanks.
Jessica, which actually brings me to an endo diet, I think, as we talk about that. What you talk about this a lot in your book, because of course this is your specialty, and you come up with all these lovely recipes. But what do you suggest that people eat and don't eat if they have endo?
Well, I don't think there's an endo diet. Sad to report. I wish that if there was, I would be a gazillionaire. I think that it's so individualized to you. And I think what's so important is to get the idea out that there is one endo diet for everyone, because what works for me might not work for you. But I do think that we can build a foundation. And I think a foundation is beginning to feel and see what triggers us and our pain. So for myself, I first started by taking out, I call them the BIs, the big inflammatories. I took out dairy, sugar, processed foods, and I started to kind of see, like, how do these make me feel when I reintroduce them again? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. When I first started, I allowed, I ate cheese once a week. It's like, how does that cheese make me feel when I eat it? And then I started eating it maybe twice a month. And then I got to the point where I was like, I don't really feel that great when I'm eating this. I think we have to kind of shut out what we see on Instagram too, because some people online say that caffeine and eggs are the devil for endo, and other people, it makes them feel just fine. I think we don't know. Everybody is so different, just like our endo is different. So I think starting with the foundation of turning to more whole foods, turning to more plants, and really start diving into those bigger inflammatories, and ask yourself how they make you feel. Don't ask somebody else how they make you feel.
I agree. And that's what I do with my patients. I get them to keep a food diary, and we look for correlation, and people are very different. And dairy is one of those things that people are very different about, actually. Some people get quite mucousy in response to dairy, and they know who they are. Their nose starts to run and they get post-nasal drip really quickly. Those people with the non-pigmented endo that is a little bit mucousy, that makes it worse. And they can tell when they take dairy out. I think most people do better without processed sugars, is what I've found. Just sugars and processed foods, and artificial sweeteners go along with the sugars there, unfortunately. And coffee, for some people, really makes it worse. And then, the good thing is you'll be able to work it out, because your symptoms will get better and you'll come up with your own sort of endo plan, which is a great idea. I just want to read something out of the chat, because I'm watching the chat as we go. And Gabriella said, "Bring your own dessert is my new motto. When I changed my diet, my social life was so affected. I felt so misunderstood. Bring your own dessert was so my motto that after I changed my diet, I actually started selling endo-friendly cakes."
Oh, that's amazing.
Go, Gabriella. They're vegan, low sugar, not processed sugars, natural sugars, she means. And some of them have no wheat flour. They have oat flour, rice flour, and they're budget friendly. So go, Gabriella. You see, we get inspired by our own situation. And when we're solving our problem, we can solve other people's problems, a bit like you, look.
And I also want to mention too, I think when we see people on the other side, and I have a cookbook, and now I have a book that has, oh my gosh, I learned how to cook to manage my endo. I would burn rice before. I had never cooked a day in my life. My husband cooked all of our meals. So, I even ran into a friend, I hadn't seen in 10 or 15 years. And she said, "What are you up to?" I said, "I wrote a cookbook." She's like, "You don't cook?" And it's like, well, people can change. And I think sometimes when I hear people say, "Well, I can't cook," it's like, well, you don't have to make a super complicated tiramisu. You can make a 3-ingredient energy ball. Like we can adapt and make it work for us.
Yes. And I think that message comes across in your book. I'm going to answer something from the chat, Emma, and then I'm going to let you ask something from the people back home. But Ma says, can endometriosis cause anemia? And if yes, how do you address it? And the answer is yes, sometimes it can. If it causes you to have very heavy periods, then it can. And here's how I address it. For a start, there is on the market, I have no interest in this company, just so you know. There is on the market a liquid iron supplement from Germany called Floradex, and it's very safe. The pediatricians even use it with kids. It's extremely absorbable, and I find it's very helpful in people who have very heavy periods. So Floradex, that's the thought. You have to keep it in the fridge because it's perishable. And I think that's why it's so good. Incidentally, it's sort of a living thing. It's not processed. So there's that. I give people herbs to stop them bleeding so much. We have a category of herbs in Chinese medicine called hemostatics, which means stop bleeding. And I give them during the period to stop that kind of very heavy bleeding. And I combine them with herbs for cramps. So that would be one thing to do. And that's particularly important because often eating meat makes your endo symptoms worse, but can help with the anemia, as you can imagine. So supplementing, taking iron supplements and stopping the heavy bleeding is how I handle that with my patients, Ma. And I think it's a good question, so I wanted to answer it.
Yeah.
Emma.
Yes, thank you. That was my next question, but I'm glad that you
sorry
to it. No, that I thought that was an interesting one. And also, anecdotally, I also take Floradex every day, and it tastes really good. So,
oh, cool.
I also recommend it, but I don't know the background. It just tastes good.
We're very devoted to it at Yinova. We've solved lots of people's problems with Floradex.
So someone sent in a question. They said, I finally have a diagnosis, but I'm not sure what to do now. I want to feel comfortable in my body, but I don't know where to start, and wondered what you two would.
Jessica, you go first about that straight after diagnosis where it just all feels like overwhelming.
I think that one thing that first you can celebrate that you got a diagnosis, because that might have taken a long road to get there. And I think that sometimes it's okay to know that you might feel uncomfortable for a little bit until you find solutions. I think that sometimes change does feel uncomfortable at first. So I think it's also so important to start to define what your best is with endo. And that's what I talk a lot about in the book, because I think that we can get really down on ourselves about all of our symptoms and how our life is going to look with a chronic condition. But I think how can we live our best life with endo? And I wish that was something that I did in the beginning, because I definitely you used the word gloom and doom, and I went down that very dark hole into, you have to get a hysterectomy, you can't have kids, like all of these things that were coming at me. And I wish back then I would have said, okay, no, how can I define living my best with endo? And that might not be running a marathon, but that might be being an expert, rebound jumper, or being great at the foam roller, or learning how to cook. I think that it's hard to do in the beginning to be so positive, and I don't like toxic positivity, but I think if we can just kind of sit and just start thinking about it, and that's why I included a lot of writing prompts in the book, because this is a lot to process, and I think that's okay that it might take a little bit of time.
Yeah, and you mentioned toxic positivity, and when I think of that, I think of it more like glossing over, like it's all okay. This is a chronic issue that you're going to have to manage and find your own route through, because it'll be your own version of endo. But I think that's such good advice, is just to have a sense of possibility that you can get this under control. Lots of people have done it, and there are lots of people out there willing to help you. I suggest that Jessica's book is actually a really good place to start getting it, your own version of this under some kind of control, so that you can live your best life, which I do think is entirely possible. So I'm grateful for you for saying that. Emma, what questions?
Yeah, I think that sounds like really good advice. So thank you. The next question is about insomnia. So this person has chronic all the time pain in their right hip and leg because of their endo, and it causes a lot of insomnia, and not sleeping obviously isn't great for stress and inflammation reduction. But they're feeling at a loss of what to do and wondered what your advice would be for handling sleep.
I'll let Jill take this one. I feel like she's dealt with this before. She's the doctor here.
I have. And first of all, I want you to know that I'm so sorry. We're both so sorry because we know that that is hard when you have the pain the whole time and it's keeping you awake at night. That means that all day you're dealing with everything else you deal whilst being in pain. And as Jessica mentioned, you know, you don't want to just keep telling your family the same thing. My situation has not changed. I'm still in pain, sort of thing. And it's hard. That is hard. So if you were my patient, I would start by trying to reduce your pain, to be honest. We could also look at herbal sleep aids and things like that that aren't addictive. But I would start with sort of pain relief. And it may well be a combination of pharmaceutical pain relief, which, you know, you may well need and you should have. Nobody should be in the sort of pain that you're in where you can't sleep at all. So, but I would start from the premise that we should be able to get you out of pain between conventional medicine, Chinese medicine, lifestyle changes. We should be able to get your pain reduced enough that you can sleep. This is a good case for sort of having a sort of endo plan for yourself. But I would, acupuncture is really helpful with the pain from endo. And so I would start by, I don't know whether you've tried acupuncture, but if you haven't, it may be a really good tool for you. And you don't need, it's not like taking a painkiller, so you don't need to keep topping it up in that way. But a weekly acupuncture session could have you with reduced pain for the whole week. And then usually what happens is the body becomes less sensitive and you have less pain. We stretch out those treatments. So we see you every other week and then once a month, and then we're on a sort of maintenance thing of every quarter, that kind of thing. So I would want to give you acupuncture and maybe a herbal sleep aid and help you get the kind of plan that you can sort of develop from Jessica's book. Actually, I help you come up with a plan that works for you and works for your lifestyle. But you should be taken seriously and you shouldn't be in so much pain that you can't sleep at night. And I'm really sorry.
And I don't know the philosophy in Chinese medicine about cannabis, but I will say that cannabis.
We're herbalists.
Okay, right. Okay, just making sure. But I will say that cannabis on really bad. I didn't try weed for the first time until I was 33 years old, but I started to use it to manage some bad nights with endo. So I think if you can get your hands on some cannabis right before bed, it can be extremely helpful just to kind of have your body just relax for a minute too.
Well, it isn't legal everywhere yet, as you know, and it's not legal in New York yet, although I think we're going in that direction. But if cannabis is legal in your state, that would be a really good thing. You may want to try CBT if it isn't, and see if that's helpful too. Emma.
Thank you. Let's see here. Someone was wondering if you have advice specifically for someone with endometriosis in the bladder, in particular, any advice on exercise or reducing extreme bloat?
I mean, I think that from a medical standpoint, if you're able to see an excision surgeon, which is not always covered by insurance, unfortunately, it can come with a pretty hefty price tag. So it's hard to just say, go get an excision surgery. But a lot of time with ablation surgery, they're not able to burn the endo. They're not able to burn the endo away in those sensitive areas. So they leave it behind. With excision surgery, you're going to be able to excise it from those areas that otherwise they wouldn't burn it. So if you are able to see an excision surgeon specialist, and then they would actually be able to have another specialist in the room with them while they do the surgery, it can be hugely beneficial. If not, Jill might have some tips for that, but I think, yeah, it's a tricky one.
It is tricky, and I agree with you about excision there, because it's really hard to have endo pressing on your bladder. I treat it somewhat symptomatically, which isn't very me. I usually get to the root, or try and get to the root of things, but with it causes different problems with urination. So some people have urinary frequency, some people have urinary leakage, when they laugh or cough, and so just, which is called stress incontinence. So I try and I have herbs for stress incontinence, believe it or not. I'm doing this because they raise a little bit. Chinese herbs have directions attached to them, and I think of them in that way. So I would probably give you a herbal formula that's anti-inflammatory and deals with the symptoms a little bit. And I see that help, possibly not cure, because it's not making the endo go away, but I see it really help those symptoms a lot. So that's definitely worth a try. And also, I didn't realize actually that excision surgery wasn't always covered by insurance. That is.
No, there's one insurance code for endo, and that is for ablation surgery. And so there are some people that have been able to work with an insurance company for like a year or 6 months to have it covered. But usually when you're going into a big surgery, you don't either have time to do that, or you don't have the means to do that. So yeah, I mean, my last surgery and the majority of excision surgeries range from $15,000 to $20,000. It's a ridiculous price tag that I think and hopefully will be changed soon.
I was going to say that this is a condition that affects so many women that we need to be squeaky wheels, actually, the lot of us, on behalf of.
Yeah, and the American College of Gynecology, ACOG, still lists ablation as a completely fine surgery, and they don't really recognize excision as the gold standard. So it's happening from the top, and we need to have it come down.
All right. Thank you, Emma.
So earlier in this discussion, or this evening, we started to talk about advocating for yourself, and I wanted to just revisit that because a lot of people had sent in questions about how to do that. So I'll just read one out that kind of captured the sentiments of other people's questions. So do you have advice on how to more actively and effectively advocate for myself when speaking to my doctor?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two routes to do it, and I can give examples of both. One, I just went to a new gynecologist, and I was telling him how I was having a lot of weight gain and hormone issues, and I would like to get some tests done. And he suggested that I join Weight Watchers, which is the most horrible answer that anyone can imagine. Now, in that moment, I decided to advocate myself by finding a completely new doctor, because I don't think that this person in any way, shape, or form is for me. And I don't really know that I could explain to him how offensive that was. Now, in other situations, when I do see a new doctor, and even him, I have a history of having very large cysts. And for 5 years, I asked for an ultrasound, and my doctor said, "You feel great. You don't need an ultrasound." And a 10-centimeter cyst grew at that point, and I had asked multiple times. So now when I go into a doctor's office, it's a new doctor, I say, "I would like to get an ultrasound every 6 months. And if that is not okay with you, then it's okay. We can't work together." So I think you can advocate for yourself in two ways. One, just find a new doctor, never speak to that person again. You don't have to fight to defend yourself against someone that doesn't get it. Or I think the flip side is saying exactly what you want. And that can take a lot of practice to do, because there is definitely a huge power dynamic in a doctor's office. I mean, that's how we're taught, right? He or she knows everything. You're there to learn. But I think that is changing a lot, because I think we're learning so much more about our bodies. I think we're able to talk about it better. And I think you have every right to say exactly what you want from a doctor.
I agree. And I do think that's changing actually as time goes on. Certainly at Yinova, I have always wanted Yinova to feel extraordinarily safe for people so that they could unpack things with us. And so I'm careful that we're not too hierarchical. Do you know what I mean? Like I have all the answers and you don't. And, pay. And I always tell this to the Yinova team, listen to the patients because they will actually tell you everything. People know what's going on with them really well if you listen to them. So I would advise you to sometimes getting everything out in a doctor's appointment can be really hard. So make yourself a list of your symptoms as you think of them. You're going to see a new doctor, start to write them down, even the sort of less troubling ones. Get a full picture of what's going on. And then Jessica's right. Different doctors have different systems for monitoring. So you can find someone who'll give you a sonogram. I don't have endo, and I have a GYN who does a sonogram every 6 months to just check my ovaries and things like that. So you can actually, the same person who was the surgeon I mentioned earlier, she's a surgeon oncologist GYN in New York, very talented and super smart. And she checks everybody's ovaries twice a year. So it's entirely possible to have the kind of treatment. And I also would find a doctor who helps you manage this yourself in some way, that isn't just you may need medication, you may need painkillers, you may need something to your hormonal medications. There are all sorts of things that you may need, but you also need help managing this in between trips to the doctor. So someone who isn't opposed to you seeing a nutritionist or seeing an acupuncturist like me, someone who's open-minded about you finding your own route through it and what works, I think is probably
for me, it's always a red flag if the first thing they suggest is hormone therapy or a hysterectomy. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. That for a lot of us, that is the first line of defense. When you see a gynecologist and you have endo, they say hysterectomy or they say hormone replacement. And for me, that's always a red flag, because then I know that they're not maybe going to be open to lifestyle changes or diet, and generally they're not. So I like to be with someone that has a nice blend of the Eastern and Western and open-minded.
Sarah has a nice comment in the comments. She says, I've also heard it's helpful to say, can you make a note in my chart explaining why you're denying this test? Yes, Sarah, that is actually really good advice. That's why I'm reading it out. You're right. Get people to be accountable for what they're saying to you. And it should go in your chart. If you're being refused a sonogram and you end up having a 10 centimeter cyst like Jessica, it's good to have that, to have noted that you were asking for a sonogram and it wasn't deemed appropriate. But in general, it's good not to have an oppositional relationship with your doctor. So find someone you don't have an oppositional relationship with. Get someone who's in your corner, because that's the most healing thing, is to feel like you have someone who's hearing you and responding and is trying to help you solve your problems. Yeah.
And I think that's something too that you can, because it's so hard sometimes to find someone, that I think that's when you can look into the endo community and say, hey, I live here. Who has listened to you? Who has been supportive to you? Because we all don't have the time or money either to be going to 10 different doctors to find, we're dating and things is hard enough. We can't do that with a doctor too. We need a quicker path to a good doctor.
Yes, lean into the endo community. It's very good advice. We're getting towards the end, Emma, but
I know. I wanted to say there's so many really great questions coming in, and I've made note of them all. And so after this, we'll send a recap email covering some of the points that we made and a link to the recording. And I'll try my best to get some answers to these questions to send them back to you in that email. So if we didn't get to them, don't worry. I'll try my best to get back to them in the email.
Emma has at her disposal lots of Yinova acupuncturists. I have a clinic day tomorrow, but I'll answer some of them. Jessica will answer some of them, and then the Yinova team will answer some of them. But we'll try and. This is an important question though. Nicole says, how do we access the endo community? I just moved to a new state and I need to find some help. Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do that a few different ways. I mean, obviously, you can go online and there are so many great Instagram groups of endo. I do think it's important to find the one that is best for you. I personally have a very hard time with a lot of sad posts and things that are not as positive where other people connect with that. So I think it's important to kind of look around and see who you connect with. And then you can kind of see in the comments, you can even DM maybe the person that runs that account and say, hey, I live in this state. Would you mind asking the community what doctors that they found? I also think even there are endo meetup groups in a lot of cities too. I mean, now that things are starting to open up more and they are online as well. You can join my newsletter at knowyourendo.com because I send out a newsletter and we do a lot of events with the endo community. So, even if we can't be in person, it's a really good way to share and connect.
Thank you, Jessica.
That's great. I'm trying to think of what a good question would be for these last few minutes that we have together, something a bit more general. A few people had asked about, they have had or suspected they've had endometriosis for years now. And they were wondering if you had any advice just to kind of, how do I phrase it? Just advice on surviving and thriving and not feeling too stuck down in like the rundown of dealing with endometriosis for so long.
Yeah. I think life sometimes shrinks to the size of your problem, understandably. Pain particularly is very hard. It's hard pain to move beyond. That's why I was so sad for the patient who couldn't sleep with pain. It's hard, but I think broadening out your life again, making, so that endo, and I think part of doing that is having a plan you're happy with for your endo. Yeah. So get yourself a good plan, find yourself a good doctor, take care of yourself. Self-care is particularly hard for women. I think we put everybody first, but have a plan for self-care and make that plan include some things that are broader than your endo, for you, so that your life doesn't feel like it's shrinking to the size of your pain, which is very easy to do if you're living with chronic pain. And don't give up, seek solution. Is what I would say to you, and I would say that to everybody. I've done my job for over 20 years, and in that time, I have seen people find solutions to their symptoms from endo by being persistent and trying things until they work. And it's been an absolute privilege to help people do that and play a little role in that. But keep seeking solution because there are, this can improve for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually really like that idea of not just, what was the thing that you said about the pain?
Life shrinks to the size of your pain. It's really easy for that to happen, I think.
Yeah, and I will tell you, writing 70,000 words about endo, I was very much more aware of my endo than I have been in nearly a decade. So I think, as much as I say, join these communities, and I think we also have to just not be so focused all the time, on the gloom and doom and what's not possible. Like you said, to kind of expanding that a little bit more, I think can be so incredibly, but yes, at the same time, find answers.
Yes, because one of the reasons your life shrinks is things like really heavy periods are so debilitating that once a month you're planning how to not have to be in public where, you could leak through into your jeans and things like that. So seek solution whilst also sort of keeping your life, the rest of your life broadened out so that you're an informed endo patient, but you're not just an endo patient, you're also you. And I
Yeah.
think that's important.
Just working on ways to feel more comfortable. I mean, period underwear has changed my entire life. Like, I mean, I can't wear them the first 2 days of my period because my flow is a little bit too heavy, but I'm on my period right now and I'm sitting upright and I feel very proud of that. And I'm wearing period underwear and I'm not feeling my pads sloshing around and
Yes.
I feel like just anything you can do to provide more comfort for your body. And that doesn't have to be long bubble baths or long self-care practices. It can be buying a pair of period underwear and feeling more comfy.
It's a good place to end. And Jennifer said yes to the period underwear, life-changing. It is, Jennifer. Things have come on.
Yeah,
I would like to thank Jessica for writing this book. I know how much hard work goes into writing a book because I've written some books myself. This is her second book. It's a joy. It's going to help a lot of people. I'm proud to know you, Jessica. And thank you. The book is called Know Your Endo, an empowering guide to health and hope with endometriosis. She's lovely, as you can tell.
And Jill is very modest, but she also contributed to the section on traditional Chinese medicine. So she's in the book too.
I am. I looked myself up. And I was like, yes, I did talk to Jessica, but Jessica actually interviewed lots and lots of people. So she gets lots of advice from different practitioners. And it's one of the reasons the book's so helpful. And Gabriella said, I've enjoyed the book so much and I've only had it for 3 days. Life-changing. It's like having a big sister in a book. I thought that actually. It's like having
Gabriella, that's so nice.
It is. Love from Colombia, she says.
Oh, so
Gabriella is the same person who has made the endo.
The vegan, the endo cakes. Oh, we'll have to share endo cake together someday. Thank you so much, everybody.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Emma.
Wisdom with us. This has been so interesting. So thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, you guys. Thanks for joining us. Take care. Bye.